Ngiyanibingelela futhi ngiyanamukela ohlelo oluhamba phambili olukhuphulisiso sangakithi nofundisa isizwe sangakithi ngezinto ezibalekile iDaily Theta khona la ku-SABC 1 Mzansi for sure. Igama nginguPearl Show kanti ke njengenjwayelo asihambisi sodwa ukhona uFortune Madlala osethulela lolu hlelo ngobeni lwezandla. Masivula ke isihloko sisanamhlanje sibuka into ebaleke kakhulu ngoba sonke sesithi masikhula sifike leminyaka lapho ethanda khona ukuthi si-explore izinto that are around us, the teenage years, the ones that are called the years of adolescence. Now, what happens during these years? Siyazi ukuthi kuningi okushintsha ngathi indlela esizizwa ngayo nendlela futhi esibona umhlaba ngayo. How do parents feel when their children hit the adolescent stage of their lives? Do they know how to support their children? Do they have an open communication line n'ingane zabo? Noma ingabe ke abazali babona ingathi ingane zihlupha kakhulu when they get to the stage and they should be held tight on a very tight leash and be prevented from exploring whatever it is that children hope to explore in these years. Namhlanje sihlaziya lolu daba.
Lena ke le dumedisa ka lebitso ke na Nicolette wa ka mashile kgerebe ya kwa Bush Pakrishma planning. As Pearl has already mentioned, re lebella bona ba sa ba leng mengwageng ya mahlalagadi re botse gore na ba tekwa byang nna from a cognitive perspective, from an emotional perspective. My kutlo bona ke mtlhobo mang nna, but also understanding gore na how do they cohesively interact or engage with society. That's what we're looking at. When you were a teenager, how were those years? How did you feel? Did you actually understand your parents and some of their expectations? Of course, on Daily Theta, we are bringing them into studio, our teenagers and their parents, to get a better understanding of how do we make these two age groups really get along. But to broaden our conversation, we also bring in a therapist and a lawyer, because sometimes there are those things that you do during your teenage years that you don't think have consequences. If you are a teenager and you're watching us right now, please do dial in and tell us, how is it going? What do you feel that your parents just don't understand about you? Or sometimes what are some of those things? And if you are a parent to a teenager, we also love to hear from you. Remember, you have to use the hashtag Daily Theta. Our number still is 011-339-1315.
When we are teenagers, what are the things that you would fight your parents on as a teenager?
You know, my parents are actually quite lucky because I was a great teenager. I'm just joking. My parents were so strict, man. Yeah. I feel that sometimes would my life have turned out differently if my parents had allowed me to explore? I only got an opportunity to explore when I was in varsity. I mean, I was still a teenager then, but again, it's this big bad world that you're going into that you could have been more prepared for if parents just were to loosen that grip.
Ukuba adolescent is not just about umjolo. Ngesikhathi abazali bacanga ukuthi cha sibuka abafana noma abafana babuka amantombazana sesifuna ukwenza izinto ezeqile ngeminyaka yethu, but it's not always like that. I as a teenager ngangithanda ukuphendula kakhulu, sengiyibona ukuthi ngimdala nempama zaze ngithola kakhulu, kodwa ke sihambile nogcina mdikane sa emgaqweni sayobuza wena ukuthi ngabe ucabangani ngokukhula kwama teenagers. Why do they feel the need ukuthi ba explore ngezinto ezahlukahlukene, from parties to their bodies? Let's see what you had to say.
Ngokuqala ngasho ukuthi peer pressure, enye into futhi lack of knowledge, nongalandela into eziserious nje. Yeah.
Ngicabanga ukuthi ayenziwa ukuthi basesebancane basafuna ku experience izinto, babone ukuthi umhlaba or izinto zinjani.
Aish bona konyano homnate mo bophelo nje wa bona le dilo di no iragala easy so wayibona. That's why batho ba rata dilo sona ka gore le chalete no ragola re gona lo balansa dilo ntshware. That's why re ya kwa le kwa.
Hey, I didn't know ukuthi why benza sona yayibona, and asifuni ukuthi benze lezo zinto. I understand. So sifuna ukuthi babe ne future. Yeah, I understand.
Well, I guess it's a peer pressure and having like too many friends.
They don't think of my consequences, so they just want to have fun and experience that good time.
Ay cha ngibona kanjalo nje bavele bayenze budedengu, abanye bayaba endleleni, abanye bayazenzela nje umathanda nje.
Cha bakubheki sibheka nje into ekhona khona manje ubumnandi bamanje, ama consequences eza after awaqatshwanga lento lena abona sokusuku after
bona bana gana gore o ka ba le danger mara ga se ntwe lo ra expecta ge re ya monateng so or re gruba sona a re expect gore o ka iragala gore o be le bo-dangerous ka gare.
Ha ba nahane ha ke re ke shebile ha ba nahane hore na hantle ditlamorao tsa ho rata dilo ke difeng ba shebile fela pele fela hore na ba tlameha ba phele jwang.
Ukuphuza utshwala njengamanje sesengene straight nje etshwaleni and lento le yangiphazamisa entweni eyiningi yeah ngiluza i-direction nje.
Ana isale ke gore ha ke etsa ntho tse ngata bua nnete ha ke etsa ntho tse ngata bophelong tse nka ka itholang ka tsona ha ke di etsa.
Into ekade ngifisa ukuthi ngenze kangcono kakhulu imfundo vele ekade ngenze kangcono because when you comes ungafundanga ungayi esikolweni yabona awuna future sometimes kwesinye isikhathi I understand.
I'm so glad that the therapist is going to be here joining us. This exploring idea, is it a bad thing or is there a guided way in which a teenager should explore?
Yeah, interesting. The trajectory of your life is not dependent on your teenage years.
Absolutely.
And you tend to predict their future is going to be doomed. And then 10 years down the line, you're surprised when they're doing well for themselves and they're actually an orderly and disciplined adults. We do have our studio audience on this issue. Let's give them a warm welcome.
And I think, well, I mean, you're 19 years old right now. How has being a teenager been for wena?
Sanibonani igama lami nguthenjiwe wakadlamini. So into engayisho ukuthi mina bengiphila angathi ngisehontshini like angathi ngisejele my ubaba mbeke very strict. So yonke chance engitholayo bengisebenzisa kakhulu nje ngiyariska ukuthi yonke into ngiyenze manje ngingayenzi sengimdala sekumele ukuthi ngisettleishe down nabantwana bami nje I risk.
Mawuthi uyariska Thenjiwe wenzani izinto ezifana nani uthatha ama risk kuzo?
Okay kunokuthi abangani bathi okay sihamba siye kwi groove okay ngizo risk lokho ngithi ngiyazijabulisa nami kusemanje hayi ukuthi sengimdala
yeah
ngizo risk
hayi ngiyayizwa i-risk yakho and ngathi it's a very well balanced risk you know she's thinking about this.
Yes, ngesikhathi sesizwe ngathi we are missing out kakhulukazi when we've got friends who are able to do certain things, go to parties and experiment. But wena ingabe zikhona izinto mhlambe from your teenage years lezi uma uthi ubuyele emuva you wish ukuthi ish ngabe ngalithola ithuba nami lokuthi ngenze lokho nalokho?
Mike Papa.
Mike Papa.
Ngimenze mamba from Eswatini. Mina kude lengathi nje ayi ngeke ngakumisa because empilweni ngikwende konke ngidasho kanjalo nje and I feel ku right lokuthi ngikwentile because angiregreti lutho. But ke futhi na imiyale batali ngiyayibonga kakhulu because umtali yena nguyilo hambe phambili before le age le ngiyakuyo mina. So kuyaye kusite lokho because yena uyakutshela ukuthi nguloko naloko lotawuhlangabetana nake empilweni. So I really appreciate nalokuthi kube khona info labasitshela yona and then futhi lokunye mase ukhulile kula ubona khona ukuthi bebangikhuta la kuze ukuthi ba avoid 1 2 3 and 4. So I think yeah, for now.
Maybe let's hear from our guest. I mean, if you think about it, Sianda, what are some of the things that you feel would see, you know, I was misunderstood on, or I'm still being misunderstood on?
Well, so many things. My mom and I, too many arguments because of the way I think. My mom.
Can you give me an example of an argument that you guys have had maybe lately?
Lately, an argument, for instance, I had to come to school earlier than usual as other students. I had to come here to help out the SRC with students and whatnot. So she wasn't able to understand that. She was like, why uhamba manje yini ukijimisa umnandi basepram? I understand there are other things that I'm committed to and I'm avoiding that. I'm trying to build an image for myself. I'm trying to be.
Do you feel good yes. maybe sometimes put this groove or pambili, if like think you're using it as an excuse when you say no SRC for instance that you actually just want to come here to party?
They absolutely do that most of the time. You can explain to them prior ukamba kwakho and then they masoga meluhambe bayaqala bayakulwisa and I understand ukuthi why bayakulwisa because now they want to spend time with you. So you leaving early simply means away from them. So I understand, but at the same time, they should understand that I also have priorities.
I love that because that's the conversation we're having today.
Enye izinto nje Nicolette ezidala ingxabano phakathi kwabazali ney'ngane zabo is the fact that there seems to be an element of mistrust kakhulu njengoba usiyanda asho ukuthi cha, my mom is always suspicious. Mangasho lokhu yena secabanga ukuthi no, mina I just want to do my own things ngesikhathi sami. Kodwa when we come back we meet a young man, uTennessee Junior Mangena, una 23 and has gone through quite a lot in his teenage years. And he comes from a Christian home. Kodwa izinto zaqala zashintsha mesengena e boarding school. I don't know if this fueled his parents' mistrust of him, but we find out must wait on.
My name is Tennyson Junior Mangena, 23 years old. I am a DJ, events coordinator, and producer as well as student. I live at home with my parents. I've got 3 little siblings. I would really say I was quite rebellious in a sense because I was not following the norm of the Christian upbringing necessarily. And then as I transgressed into high school, I went to hostel. I was in a hostel. That's where I spent most of my teenage years. When I was at hostel, I would sneak out. I would call Ubers and I would sneak out of hostel, find my way out, bribe security guards, whatever I had to do. Obviously, yeah, go to over 18 places with just a lot happening. I'm not going to lie to you. I think I did about everything a teenager could do at that age. There's nothing I didn't do. What fueled my curiosity? I think just the love. I have a big love for just the music scene. So that's kind of where it started, where I wanted to go see DJs playing and so forth. But I also think just in general, as teenagers, we need to experience life a little bit, and us wanting to know how something feels or how something is like, we kind of go ahead and take those opportunities. I definitely would say that there's like certain freedoms need to be given, because even if you don't give them, we will most likely take them anyways. I think it's just better if you've got that open communication of what I'm doing, where I am, because I think it's safer, because things do happen to people. But yeah, so if you just open that communication of just being able to understand that these people are growing up, they're going to do things, rather be in the loop than out of it, because it will happen nonetheless.
Nicolette, mina mangiqhathanisa ke impilo yaga Tennessee neyami during those years, I spot a lot of differences. Indaba zamaphathi angizange ngithola ithuba lokuzenza, kodwa into eyayikhona ukukhohlisana kwabangani kakhulu. We would mislead each other with false information. Absolutely.
I think also the other thing that we need to also remember, and which is weird, is backgrounds.
Yeah.
You see, when you guys speak about parties, it was not in a reality for me, because we didn't even talk, we are partying, what? But also people where I lived didn't throw parties, so it was not even a thing, you know what I mean? I think just to extend on the conversation with Tennessee, let's reintroduce Usiyanda Mdlokazi, who is a 19-year-old vet student, and he is still exploring, still trying to get an understanding. Siyanda, welcome to Daily Theta. One of the things Tennessee as teenagers, we must afford you guys certain freedoms. Can you talk to me about those freedoms and liberties that you would want?
Thank you for hosting me. What we usually talk about when we talk about freedom, we need nothing but trust from our parents. Our parents, lately, they fail to understand the concept of self-control. I can say I'm going to a party, meeting a party, 12, and then I'll come back maybe on 10.
Yeah.
And then so it creates a mistrust between communication. Okay, to your party, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Talk to me, I'll talk to you.
Yeah.
Communication, there's nothing best but communication. Another thing is when we talk about our parents giving us freedom, we actually need them to understand times
freedom democracy. So I like that. They must understand. But give me maybe an example of some of the things that have changed.
For instance, they were living esikhathini esinzima. They had to bafunde because apartheid was just oppressing them. So they should understand ukuthi, yes, we have freedom manje, sakwazi ukuthi sifunde ngendlela, we know how to develop indlela thina esifunda ngazo. Most of the time our parents basifisa because of education. Bazothi mawuye emjiveni uzofunda nini into ezinjalo. So bona bebaphila ngesikhathi so kwamele baze endlini nani. So thina abangani bami bazothi kunendawo kwamele siye kuyo. And mina, because I love abangani bami and ngifuna uku-experience lento leyo, I have to go with them.
Sure.
Ngeke zabo ngikuyena influence or anything.
Akafunda ama exams para akafundi.
Ngiyathanda ke ukuthi ngike ngilethe omama in this conversations ke sizwe kubona ukuthi bona indlela abaxoxisana nayo mhlambe nezingane zabo ihamba kanjani nenkulumo bayazwana yini noma kube kuba khona ne disconnect where they seem to not understand each other ngoba esikhathini esiningi ama teenagers mewakhuluma abakuniki imininingwane egcwele umuntu uzothi ngephathina athule wena njengomzali mele uqagele manje ukuthi iphathe njani kunotshwala lapho ini bayafihla kakhulu ama-teenagers, and I want to know how the moms deal with this. But to extend on this conversation, sinothandiwa Ramabuya unendodakazi ena 17 years old kanti-ke ukhona noMagokolotso Kapetsi onama-teenagers amabili. Let me start with you, Tandiwa. Welcome to Daily Theta. The language that your teenage child uses when they speak to you, are they always direct? Do you feel or do you think that they are vague and that they omit certain things because that's a reaction?
Thank you for having me today. Yeah, it's interesting because I think my daughter has her own tactics, you know, in a way she communicates with me. I think she has studied me. She's very clever. So then she has a way of sort of manipulating me. So sometimes I don't see what is coming. You know, I'm like, I cannot believe this is my daughter. But I have made it a point in my life. So as opposed to being that parent who would always be so strict, hey, I'm on your case, I try to relax some of the boundaries, at least Lena are comfortable to discuss anything with me.
So what are those freedoms, Nyana, that you've given her?
The freedoms is Saturday morning, like I'm wondering, where are you going? I know I'm going out with friends. I'm like, where exactly? Okay, will you be safe? That's one of the freedoms, but also the freedoms to use, you know, electrical gadgets. I'm crazy like that. So she doesn't get to use them all the time. You know, we set boundaries. You can go out. So we try here and there to balance the equation, but it's not easy. Yeah.
I definitely want to come back to have a conversation about using resources. Also, Magokolotso, man, I mean, looking at the ages of your two boys and yours, you had them quite young. What are some of the challenges just to bring them up, especially now that they're in their teenage years?
Okay, thank you for having me, Nicolette. It's tough. As I'm a teenage mom,
yeah.
So seeing them now and remembering that at this age, that's when they were conceived, that's when they were born. And one of my biggest fear has been them reminding me that. But it has never come to
reminding you how? By having children themselves?
No, by saying, Mommy, but now we're born.
Oh,
you were, yes, you were 14 when I conceived my firstborn. I was 14. So since 13, 14, I had that fear, but till today they have never, because I made sure that I communicate with them.
I want to ask you, conception at teenagers, how do you give them that advice without fearing?
Okay, they are boys. And what I realized is that I have to be as honest as possible. Their dad passed away, so it's only the three of us. What I normally say is, life is not easy, and I believe if it was the four of us, it was going to be easier. Some of the things, but it's only us. I'm trying to push so that you can have a better life, but if you are not helping me, then we are going to be in a circle. Be ready.
Can I ask you a question? This thing, B to the power of 7 books before boys, because boys bring babies. The conversation.
Would have been, the conversation, I think, would have been worse. Yeah, girls have an attitude.
Hey.
Yeah, at those ages, yeah, girls have an attitude, but because they are boys, I always remind them, if it happens that you have a child now, or you don't go to school, or become a better person, become somebody, next time, 5 years from today, you are going to regret, because to have a comfortable life, no. Banana ba no ba mutlisa. O tla ba ntate ngwana, and I don't know who's going to help you, because like I said, I'm trying. So I need you guys to help me. I'm studying, I'm pushing. Luena, do the same for yourself, not for me.
Because if you are looking at me, I don't stay with them. And it's not a good thing. And I always tell them, I don't want you guys to experience the same thing.
Let's leave it there for the moment. Sizoya ekhefini Nicolette into engiyithanda kakhulu, and something that I really want to get deeper into is the talk, the puberty talk, you know, that parents have with their children. When do we start to introduce certain concepts enganeni zethu ngaphambi kokuthi bazizwe emgaqweni bakhohliswe futhi abangani? We're going to continue speaking about teenagers feeling like they are being misunderstood by their parents. Hlala nathi la ku Daily Theta.
Welcome back to Daily Theta. We are still talking a little bit about teenage years and really how to get the conversation going so that we can find some sort of middle ground when it comes to bona baswa, but also batswadi babona. Now, just before the ad break, there was an interesting conversation that started on this side, right? Sianda, you mentioned something about the fact that batswadi, they're always so stressed about the homework. And then, Sister when you mentioned like times and boundaries, phone how do you make a compromise if, let's say, sianda ke ngwana gago o tla ka wena a re mama but ke tlhoka phone gore ke kgone go dira di homework? Where do you draw the compromise, or where do you feel like o nketsa popayo?
I mean, okay, I think Batwadi Babanchi can attest to this. There have been incidences. You know, there was a case where I found some video that was, you know, something that shouldn't have been happening in the first place. That's what brought the attention to me to say, let's have a conversation around the use of technology, why we use technology. We use it to benefit from it. Mara, the minute you start using it when you are kissing your friend, then it becomes something else. So now we always have the conversation, I'm going to choose to trust you. I mean, there's an app I can install to track every movement, actually, as a parent. You know, I forgot the name, but it's there. I can do that, but I'm not doing that. I choose to trust you because I believe, you are responsible. So I'm going to allow you to use the technology, but I also do some random checks here and there just to see what they've been up to.
But at the same time, she really can be studying, but if on WhatsApp or Instagram, maybe what uteri wabala and then utle wena ko desking umutola a swipe ko Instagram. It doesn't really mean she's been on Instagram the entire time. Do you feel you won't overreact in that situation, or would that be a breach of your trust?
I mean, sometimes there will be fights. You know, I will have to be that parent. I would have to be, you know, enforcing some discipline because I'm a pastor. So train up a child in a way that they should go. So there will be some instances where I'm like, okay, now you are out of order and I'm taking the phone away from you, maybe for a month or something like that, until I'm convinced you are responsible. And if I come to your bedroom and I find you watching Showmax and Netflix, you know, I'm going to have to change the Wi-Fi code. Or SABC. Exactly. I'm going to have to change the Wi-Fi code. Mara, then she would understand. There will always be some punitive, you know, things that I do, but also I don't take it for too long. So I'll punish you for a certain period, and then afterwards, I believe that you have learned your lesson, and then you can have your gadget back, and I can lift the suspension from the Wi-Fi code. And
Nice. As we grow and develop as teenagers, kubalulekile ukuthi abazali baqaphele zonke lezi zinto ezishintshayo ngathi and learn to understand ukuthi there are certain things, whether it's the language that is used towards teenagers or the actions that are taken towards teenagers that can have a lasting impact on our psychological health. To bring in a clinical psychologist to have this conversation and to carry it with us, Asamgele Ukilebogile Mojanaga, who is joining us remotely on the show. Welcome to Daily Theta. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can hear me. I really wanted to start up the conversation in terms of the communication lines. You know, sometimes when I look at my puberty years, for example, when it was time to have the talk around receiving your period, that's you know, and there's nothing that new, there's no new concept that she could have introduced to me at that stage. When should parents start having certain conversations before they get it from, you know, other sources?
Thank you for having me on the show. And I think that's a very important question. And I guess there's never really an early time to start. Parents can begin to speak to their children from as young as 4 to 5 years old, but in an age-appropriate manner. I think that is the key, because you introduce concepts around identity, concepts around body image from that age, because they start becoming quite conscious and curious about their bodies. Like, what's growing here? I'm walking, I'm talking. I love this feeling of a hug, you know, and that is a very crucial point where you start introducing certain things and say, okay, do you know these are your private parts? But obviously, like I said, in an age-appropriate way. This is yours and this is yours to keep. And you show them the parts that's theirs to keep. And then you start showing them parts where these are the parts you need to start to tell someone if someone other than family or mom and dad starts to touch you. There's going to be, and then once they start getting to the age around 8, 9, that's when puberty kicks in. Their body's changing. With girls, they're starting to grow breasts. With boys as well, they're starting to realize that their private parts are a little bit different from mom. That's the age where, you know, hair is growing, pimples are starting to show. And because children are different, some tend to develop more faster than other children. So when that happens too, you start to explain that this is normal. You know, you're going to start getting pimples, you're going to start getting sweaty. So these concepts need introduced from an early, but in a very age-appropriate way, including the talk about sex as well. You know, because in this day and age that we're living in, there's GBV, and there's a lot of trauma that's happening around our society where we find children being violated from a very young age. And that's why the language needs to exist in the household first, that if someone else touches you here inappropriately, tell mom. You know, you don't have to go into detail why it's wrong, but you're setting those boundaries and that language to introduce that. So by the time you get to the point where you start talking about sex and experimenting with that as well, you start to let them know you're going to have urges in your body, and these specific urges are going to want you to touch yourself or touch another person. So depending on the age the child is, I think it's important to open that communication. So by the time they're adolescents and starting to form their own identity, then it's already a conversation that's been opened in the home, and they know they have a safe space where they can be curious about their bodies, curious about their urges, and curious about how they look. But it should be a safe environment in the home firstly.
As briefly as you can, Ekilebohile, ho bohlokwa jwang hore batswadi do not force certain things upon their children? Ke a tseba hore ka banyana, a lot of moms will start to say, no, hambi family planning, ma uyintombazana uphuza lama contraceptives ukuze uvikeleke. And sometimes they don't give the full story or the full truth. Is it important for parents to tell the full story to their children? Obviously in an age-appropriate manner, as you alluded.
So the very important thing I recommend is guidance rather than forcing, because it's important to remember the developmental stage.
We've lost Kelebogile there, and we're going to try to reconnect with her, and perhaps maybe just to bring the conversation back into studio. Rubuti say, all right, we've got Kelebogile back.
Oh yes, sorry. So I think what I was just saying there is that it is very important that in the conversations that are being had between the parents and the children, it doesn't become a forceful one-way type of communication, because they are forming their identity and they do have their own opinions. But obviously, in a guided way, parents need to say, okay, these are the options available. This is how I can guide you to that options. But if it gets to a point where parents are quite forceful, it's suppressing a very important part of the teenager or the adolescent, and that's their ability to make decisions and obviously feel responsible for their own bodies, because ultimately parents do want their children to be responsible adults into adulthood. So they need to take responsibility for some of their actions, especially at the adolescent stage. So it is very important to culture and foster communication, but also culture and foster guidance. These are the options. This is how I can help you with it. And that makes it a two-way stream rather than a one-way stream. And that makes the home environment, again, safe, and the child is able to trust mom, trust dad, to be able to help them take those decisions.
We're speaking to Kelebogile. She is a clinical psychologist, really helping us to understand the teenage years of I mean, it's quite an interesting one for me, because one of the things that we often see is parents, parents will say some harsh things, eh?
Yeah.
Parents will say some harsh things, but if you as a teenager turn around and say, Mama, yehlisa voice, because that's disrespectful. And the child is simply just telling you, calm down. Calm down. What is the best way to be able to tell your parents to calm down, or to, to tell your parents how to speak to you? Let's discuss this all when we come back from the ad break. Welcome back to Daily Theta. We are talking about those teenagers and how exciting it can be, but also scary. And I think that is, you know, that's kind of the empathy that we need to have from both the parents and the teenagers. Getting an understanding, all of us are trying to learn. Because most parents who are parents of teenagers, when it is their first time, they're also trying to figure things out. The teenagers themselves are trying to figure themselves out when all of these changes are happening. Now, we wanted to talk a little bit about freedom of speech, but also in that conversation, let's talk a little bit about the teenager. Especially, I mean, I remember getting into fights, and I never thought somebody's going to take me to court, you know? Like, okay, we are physically fighting with this person. This person literally can take me to court. It is assault, you know? And I think those are some of the things that we don't think about. And to bring it into the conversation, this freedom of speech, because often, as batswadi, you've got every right to say whatever you want to ngwana gago, but ngwana a fetola, and especially because we do, as teenagers, get into years where ra no fetola nje. How do you balance that out, gore o se ka stifle ngwana gago from freedom of speech, but at the same time, because when something serious happens tomorrow, o tlo re mara wa o sa bolele. How do we balance it out?
With me, I learned not talking, not being straightforward, not addressing issue. It's a problem. So, if na kana koyaka kilaka bali such conversations, I don't think nkabe ki fihle mo kilaka fihla. But it was all about don't. When you ask questions, there's no answer. So with my boys, I learned habatwani, 2 different personalities. The firstborn is Mr. Disciplinarian. When you address him, you have to be spot on, respectful. Unahane hore whatever you're going to say, will you be happy when if abua jwalo le wena? And for the secondborn, he's very emotional. With him, we have to be very sensitive. So normally what they say ke hore, I understand wanghalemela, but please check your words. And ke bana ba nkgono, so generation ya batswadi ba khale le rona, it's totally different. So normally if there was something between them and my parents, I have to come in and try to make both parties understand this is 2022, we don't just talk. And also they learned now if someone says something that I don't like, I shut down. And it's not healthy again. So that's when I come in and say, you had an argument with my mom, what was happening? Then they will try to explain. And now I have to be the middleman, because now I understand. I normally give them space to express themselves so that we understand each other.
Yes, indeed. Seningi izinto eziba yingozi empilweni zama teenagers. Njengoba Nicole beshilo ukuthi ukulwa. We've seen so many times in the news videos emerging of children having fights kanti omunye ugcina seshona. Izinto efana ne statutory rape and understand ukuthi yes no wama boyfriend nama girlfriend ungena kuphi. Asazi ukuthi hamba when we are underage could land us into hot water. Ziningi izinto ehlangana nomthetho that could land our teenagers into hot water. Ingako-ke silethe umnumzane Benedict Phiri, who is a managing director at Las Prudencia, a specialist counsel. Welcome to Daily Theta, and thank you so much for making the time. If the law and our growth and development does go hand in hand, how do we as parents, as elders in our children's lives, go about teaching them the boundaries of what to do and what not to do where the law is involved? And how do we make them understand that their actions have reactions?
I think it's absolutely spot on that the law does go hand in hand with our development. You spoke about, for instance, statutory rape and statutory sexual assault, and ultimately the key around that is to basically stop exploitation. So there's a reason why, as a person younger than 16, you cannot have sexual relations with a person older than 16. You know, the age of consent in South Africa from a sexual perspective is 16. And I think what's important as a country is that we just need to engender a better literacy and a better knowledge about this. You know, I don't think people know that if you are 15 and you have dating an 18-year-old, even if it's not sexual, there's no sexual penetration, but kissing could actually land you in trouble with the law. And even as a parent, if you actually know of that sexual situation, you could actually be in trouble yourself, because the law imposes a strict obligation on you as a parent to report those instances to the authorities. So I think there just needs to be a greater education around these aspects for the various role players, the people that are overage, the parents, and the teenagers themselves.
I want to come to you, Sianda. Iziphi izinto mhlambe around, for example, things like sexuality, sexual conduct, sexual misconduct, izinto that you may have heard from the adults around you and from fellow your peers, things that you may have heard from your peers that you found were maybe not true when you later explored them. The adults around you, did they ever bring information to you, try to teach you about certain things, or were certain subjects just taboo and were never spoken about?
I'm fortunate because my uncles and my mom have worked collectively to teach me at a young age. Bebanokungihlalisa phansi mhlambe kwi-family events, and then omunye angidonse esayidini angitshele about life as a teenager, ikakhulukazi mangifika e-varsity, because mangise high school ngisasengaphansi lophahlwa kamamama ngithi, so ungibhekile uyangitshela every time izinto ezinjalo, so they equipped me ngisasemncane ngisase-primary ukuthi mawufika la uzohlanganisana nezinto ezi 1 2 3 1 2 3. This is a better way for you to not get into trouble ngalezi zinto lezi. So yeah, my family actually has helped me ukuthi ngazi kangcono.
And that's true. I think before we go at break, just briefly in that theory, how does the law deal with when a teenager is in trouble with the law? Is there sympathy? Is there, leniency? How does it deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest question really is a question of capacity and the ability to understand the consequences of your actions. So obviously, the younger you are, the less likely you are to understand what happened when you broke the law. And the older you are, the more the law is likely to take greater effect on you. So the age and stage of development does play a particular role. We got what we call emancipated minors, who are people younger than 18 but still live as if they're majors, and the law will take a different view on their actions and their ability to enter into certain criminal conduct or just normal transactions in life.
All right. We're going to quickly take an ad break. When we come back, we admit we haven't all figured it out, but how do we move forward in the best way possible for both parties? To stay with us.
samgele khona la ku Daily Theta lapho sikhuluma khona ngama teenagers and they need to explore. One of the things that young people love to experiment with is of course sex. Kanti ngesinye isikhathi siyazi ukuthi sithatha inqumo ezingekho right for thina and that can have lasting implications. Into engiyithanda ngo Benedict ngaphambi ukuthi siyidolo yobakhuluma kancane ngendaba yokuthi teenagers can get into trouble for izinto efana no statutory rape. Kodwa ngicabanga ukuthi in a country like South Africa where GBV is quite high, it's important ukuthi ingane zethu zi understand from a young age what the boundaries and limitations are and what dire consequences their actions can have when they start to experiment with sex. One of the questions that do come up, Benedict Tuguti, as a young person, ngina 12, and I'm starting to develop these sexual feelings, and I start to kiss with a boy who's my age or maybe 2 years older than me, and we engage in sexual activity, what would the consequences be? Because singontanga, and I would suppose that we are maybe developing at the same rate, but things can get murky and dangerous very quickly.
Yeah, and that's true. So, firstly, if you're younger than 12, you can't consent to any type of sexual at all. And then if you're between 12 and 16, then the leeway is a 2-year age gap. So if you're 12, you can possibly see a boy who's 14, and the law might not look at that as, you know, drastically if you're seeing a boy who's 16. Because in that instance, then you're committing a crime. Both of you are committing a crime, and it's up to the National Prosecuting Authority to then prosecute the both of you. So a 2-year age gap is okay, but beyond that, it's not okay. And again, if you're younger than 16 and you're seeing an older person, that is absolutely a crime from the perspective of the older person.
And how do we go about reporting statutory rape, just to be clear to both teenagers and parents? If you can maybe give us a quick scenario of how statutory rape can happen and the steps that they need to take once it has happened.
Yeah. So the moment there is sexual penetration, we are in statutory rape. Between someone who's younger than 16 and older, we are in statutory rape. That is a crime in and of itself. So the moment you know that, whether you're a parent or someone else, you have an obligation to report that to the police. So you just go to your nearest police station and report that. But a lesser form of sexual assault, where you see a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old kissing, that is also a crime. That is actually a crime under South African law, and anybody that is aware of that has an obligation to report that to the police station. And if you're aware of it and you don't report it, you yourself are committing a crime as well, for which you might actually be liable for.
We ibalekile leyo ngoba khona labo bhuti ingudu eyithanda ingane encane Nicolette, and it's important that they know that they could get arrested for their actions.
I think also what really stands out for me is the fact that that 2-year leeway gap does not happen or is not applicable if the other party is below the age of 16, because they've got no concern capacity. But let's go back to clinical psychologist Kilebogile Mojanaga. Kilebogile, just to wrap up our conversation, one of the biggest things that our teenagers have kind of mentioned is this issue of trust. If you can give us your last parting shot in terms of how do we foster trust between parents and their teenagers?
Okay, thank you again. Well, I think just to contextualize it, I think it's very important to acknowledge which developmental stage teenagers find themselves at. So adolescent, currently the definition is around if you're between the ages of 10 and 19. But there's more research suggesting that it should actually be extended to 25, because that's when the brain, the last part of the brain, which is the frontal lobe, finishes developing. So because the frontal lobe hasn't developed, and to give context, this means their ability to make decisions, executive functions, working memory, impulse control, it means that their decision making is compromised. And I think that's something that the adolescents also need to familiarize themselves with and learn about themselves in terms of where they are developmentally, as well as the parents to also understand that even though they set certain rules and certain ways of being, that the teens will forget because their working memory is compromised, and that they need to constantly remind them of this is what's right, this is what's wrong, but also guide their decision making. So where trust comes into that is that if both parties, the parents and the child, begin to understand that, you know, there's still this developmental process that's happening inside of me, and I do acknowledge that I do need help and I do need guidance to decision making, then it also allows the parent to know how and when to intervene. And because that fosters an open channel for communication, trust can be built. So I think it's very important to understand where they are developmentally, and for both parties to acknowledge some of their strengths and weaknesses in that regard, because some of them are biological and they can't help it. And then after that, if there's open and empathic listening and communication, then trust can be fostered.
Kilebogile, thank you very much. It's been quite an insightful conversation with you, and we really do appreciate your time. And I think that parents really should, at some point, if they feel they don't know how, should ask for help.
A conversation I recently had nomshana wami ukuthi ngimtshela ukuthi boy angikho perfect. Engakuthanda nje ukuthi ukwenze ukuthi ubuke okuhle ngami, okunye ungakunaki, because I'm not a perfect human being, and I wonder if you as a parent have any parting shots or a plea to bana ba South Africa, for them to sympathize in some way and stop idolizing and thinking that lona letseba everything, or you're trying to keep them away from everything.
Yeah, thank you. I want to who wants to be a tyrant. Yeah. We love our children, and most of the time we are the way we are because we want to protect them. And my plea to young people is, we love you. We want to know what you're going through. We are here for you. Give us that space so that we're on the same page. We were teenagers ourselves, and we know what teenagers get up to. And this is the reason why we are the way we are. But then we are also understanding it's 2022, things have changed, you know. You are more assertive than we were. So let's meet each other halfway and try as much as possible to keep the balance. But to lastly say, it's not easy. We must just give ourselves grace. Every parent out there, you are doing a good job. Keep at it.
Quick one, Sianda, we had a conversation on Daily Theta about corporal punishment. For you as a teenager, what would be the best way for your parents to punish you if you did do something wrong?
Well, the best way, it's them not taking anything away from me.
Okay.
Or yeah, but like them, maybe outside starting so for now, until we put the lesson up.
So take away a bit of those freedoms you spoke about.
Temporarily, and then bus buis.
Okay.
Can negotiate. Can negotiate all the time. And to you as a parent, you know, what would you like to say, Mhlampe, to parents and teenagers in South Africa, very briefly?
Okay, to parents, let me start there. We need help. We cannot run away from the fact that alone we cannot. So we need help. If you know and realize find someone that you can trust to make sure there's nothing a communication. Then if you tell them, then you are ready and set.
All right, unfortunately, we are out of time. It's been a great conversation, and a big thank you to all our guests today for helping us with the of teenagers experimenting and growing in this world.
Definitely don't forget the law. The law is always going to be there to help you or to... Thank you very much for tuning in. Bye.